Welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. Hope you all are having a phenomenal Tuesday, October 11th. And the player review series continues here today, here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. And today we're putting an emphasis on the catcher position. Will Roberto Perez be making his return to Pittsburgh, which seems very likely after his season ending injury sidelined him for the entire year this year? We're going to talk about the roundtable of catchers that we saw primarily this year and which one I think could return to the 26-man roster, as well as recapping and ending the episode with talking about two guys who will likely be a part of this catching stable in 2023 in Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Pirates. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. Again, I hope you all are having a phenomenal Tuesday. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day every single day here on the Locked On Pirates podcast, where it is your Pittsburgh Pirates every single day, even through the offseason. We're here 5 days a week, and you will be getting player reviews until we get through every single part of the team, as well as taking a look at the postseason every once in a while. But with that said, guys, let's get into today's episode brought to you by Bet Online.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to that Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, everybody. I am your host who does the most, Ethan Smith. The Pirates hat is back. Don't worry about this right here. I go to a Steelers bar in Savannah, and we needed a banner. So the Steelers six-time Super Bowl championship banner is currently up in a bar in Savannah right now, so that is why that is gone. I'm sure something will go there at some point. But on today's episode, we are again talking about the catcher position in regards to the 2022 Pittsburgh Pirates season. And man, the catcher position started weird. It just did, and it was going to feel weird. It's something that I talked about for most of the offseason after the Jacob Stallings trade for Zach Thompson and Connor Scott. It just, you knew when Stallings left that things were going to get weird. You didn't really know who the Pirates were going to go after in free agency. At one point in the offseason, especially right after the lockout ended, the Pirates did not possess a major league catcher on the roster outside of Michael Perez, who was eventually brought back and then, of course, DFA'd again. They opted to go with Roberto Perez, who, of course, got hurt earlier in the year. He is a former Gold Glove winner, of course, not playing up to that level much anymore. Not the greatest hitter in the lineup either, et cetera, et cetera. You can go down the list about it, but he's a defensive guy that I think really did help these pitchers when he was there. And all through the entire season with his rehab and everything that he's worked on, you've heard Roberto Perez express the fact that he wants to return to Pittsburgh because he feels like he owes the Pirates a year because they did give him that contract for this 1 year, and he unfortunately did not get to play due to injury. So I do think day by day that a Roberto Perez return is very likely. And I think it's a return that needs to happen. And we'll talk about this later in the episode as to why. But you looked at just what Roberto Perez was able to do for this season, and he didn't do terrible. He was fine. I think he was helping these young pitchers learn some of their way. You saw that a lot with Mitch Keller and Rowanzi when he was here for a short time, especially. But with the Pittsburgh Pirates, they need a guy back there in the backstop like a Jacob Stallings was for this team for so long. That was just a pillar back there. And Roberto Perez appeared to be that. But in his 60 at-bats this year, 233 average, 2 home run, 8 RBIs with a 700 OPS, if that translated over a full season, I would take that from Roberto Perez. But here's the hint on what I think will happen with Roberto Perez is I don't think that the Pirates necessarily need him for the entire season. And that's a good thing because Roberto Perez, I believe, will be going on his age 34 season. Yes. So, especially at the catcher position, you do have to understand that with catchers, they definitely age a lot quicker than other guys. Because, I mean, you could just see how they play. I mean, they play in a way that you're sitting on your basically sitting in a crunch position for ends on ends in games. But I do think the idea of Roberto Perez coming back is highly likely more than it is not likely. I think it's about a 70-30 chance that he does end up coming back to Pittsburgh. And I think it'll only help this team because you saw the struggles that this team had at the catcher position this year. And it was warranted to say that the way they handled the catcher position was awful. It just really was. It was a terrible, terrible way to handle this position. Jacob Stallings, I still didn't agree with that trade in the first place. It did end up getting us Connor Scott. Zach Thompson showed flashes every once in a while, but I still don't think the idea of Connor Scott being in Double A and Zach Thompson struggling outweighed the importance of Jacob Stallings. I didn't really pay attention to him much in Miami, so I don't know how he played in Miami. Go check out Peter Pratt of Locked On Marlins for that. At the end of the day, the Pirates, I think, did realize at some point that the catcher position is going to be an emphasis that they have to focus on in the offseason. But most of those answers might already be in-house. And I say that with the utmost confidence because of the fact that this team gave a lot of people chances this year. They did. And before we get into all of those guys and who I like the most out of all of those guys, today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Bet Online. Of course, Bet Online is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening today. And BetOnline is where the game starts. So, getting into what I would call just the ever-changing wheel of catchers this year, the Pittsburgh Pirates never had a real answer at this position after Roberto Perez got hurt. It was evident, it was clear that it wasn't ever going to have an answer. But there were some bright spots. And that might be crazy of me to say, but we're going to start with Tyler Heinemann, who batted .217 with a .554 OPS, looked okay defensively. He's already 31 years old, which I think does kind of hurt his chances here of being the guy that returns because at some point the Pirates are going to have to say they have to pick one of these guys. They're going to have to pick one of these guys to be on the roster behind Roberto Perez as the backup catcher at some point this offseason. Heinemann, maybe. I did like him defensively. Jason DeLay, on the other hand, .213 with a .536 OPS, 1 home run, and 11 RBIs, came out of the gates fast. Zach Collins was also picked up off of waivers. I think that's all you need to really say about Zach Collins, one of the former top picks. And then Jose Godoy definitely will not return. The Pirates have a decision to make on this front, mainly because of the fact that Roberto Perez will likely be back. And if he's not back, they're going to go pick somebody up in free agency. You cannot come back in to 2023 with Jason DeLay and Tyler Heinemann being your catchers. You just cannot do it. So that gives you two options. You either go to Jason DeLay or Tyler Heinemann. I think those two will probably fight it out in spring training to see who ends up getting the 26-man job behind Roberto Perez or another catcher. Or you do the non-Pirates thing and call up a top prospect at that position earlier than you would think, which probably will not happen. So, what the most likely option here is with the round table of catchers that we saw this year is I think Zach Collins and Jose Godoy will be the two that end up in the minors or DFA'd or whatever. And then Jason DeLay and Tyler Heinemann will fight it out in spring training to see who wins the backup catcher position as things currently stand. Now, if they decide not to bring back Roberto Perez and not to bring in a catcher, then you're just dealing with Jason DeLay and Tyler Heinemann and delaying the inevitable. If you sign Roberto Perez and then keep one of these guys, you're creating a decent stable of catchers while you're waiting on the two top guys in the system to eventually come up and then see where they end up. Now, Zach Collins, on the other hand, I do think could potentially move to first base. I don't think he's a fit over there. Don't get me wrong. And we're talking about first baseman on Thursday. Tomorrow is our mailbag episode. So we're talking about the first base position, options that are going to be available, etc., like that. But none of these guys exactly spit off the page of long-term fixes. And they're not supposed to. And the reason I say that is pretty obvious. I mean, if you think that Jason DeLay or Tyler Heinemann is a future option on this team as a catcher, good luck. As I mentioned already, Heinemann's already 31. Jason DeLay's 27. So these guys are already kind of in that area where you usually see catchers starting to take a decline. If they decline any more than they already play, I mean, they're unplayable. That's why Jose Godoy is going to be gone. He's just unplayable. It's probably why Zach Collins will be gone, because he's just unplayable. But putting an emphasis on this is important to me because you know how the Pirates operate. You know that they're going to push back their top prospects next year in favor of service time manipulation. And I'll be honest with you here, I have no issue with it. Because with the lay of the land and the roster that they currently possess, who are you benching some of these guys for? The catcher position, though, is the one spot, and first base. The catcher position is the one spot, though, on this team that I can legitimately say we have prospects in the system that are better than the guys that we currently possess. So to stop delaying the inevitable here. When do we see Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis? Going into this 2022 season, it was Henry Davis this, Henry Davis that, Henry Davis this, Henry Davis that. That's all you heard about the catcher position in terms of prospects. Here comes Endy flippin' Rodriguez, 22 years old, and dude, the stat line that he possessed this year was just absolutely phenomenal. 458 at-bats, 323 average, 25 home runs, 95 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, and a 997 OPS. Keep this in mind, by the way. May 1st of 2021, last year, May 1st of 2021, Endy Rodriguez was optioned to Bradenton. Last year, in May. This year, he was assigned to Single A Greensboro in April of 2022. Okay? August 9th comes, he gets called up to Altoona. He was in Altoona for like a little over a month. And then September 20th, he gets assigned to the Indianapolis Indians. Just an absolute crazy season for him. And you look at the splits in terms of high A plus, double A, and triple A. In Greensboro, 66 home runs, 55 RBIs, a 302 average. That was in 88 games. 31 games for Altoona. He made the jump from single A to double A. A lot of times you see players struggle there. Not this guy. 8 home runs, 32 RBIs, 18 walks, 356, 442, 678, and a over 1,000 OPS on the year. And that was in 31 games. And then in 6 games at Endy, 1 home run, 8 RBIs, 455, 435, 773. In his minor league career, Endy Rodriguez has over 1,000 at-bats, a 303 average, 44 home runs, 205 RBIs, and a 926 career OPS. Slash line over his career, 303, 393, 533, 926. He made the jump from barely cracking the top 10 prospects in the Pirates system this year to the top 100 MLB prospects list on MLB.com. He also was named Catcher of the Year on the All Prospect First Team on MLB Network and in plenty of other places. Endy Rodriguez is a guy, dude. He is a guy. I mean, won FSL Most Valuable Player last year. Postseason All-Star in 2021. Sal Player of the Month in Greensboro. The dude is nuts. And to think that they picked him up from the New York Mets for practically nothing. Now, here's what I always say, though. He is a catcher. That is what he is listed as right now. But Endy, I believe, has the versatility to play elsewhere. A little bit more than other top prospect, Henry Davis. Now, when you look at Henry Davis, he's 6'2", 210 pounds, where you heard me say earlier that Endy is 6 foot, like 190 something. That makes a huge difference. A huge difference if you're looking to move him elsewhere. Now, you do have an issue at first base. Could either of these guys play first base? It's quite possible. Henry Davis, I think, could profile 6'2", 210 pounds. Yeah. He could probably play over there defensively. But I will say I do think Henry Davis is a better overall defensive catcher than Endy Rodriguez. But I also believe in Endy to be able to move somewhere else. Where do you move him? Do you move him to the outfield? Do you move him to first base? Because I'm going to be honest with you. If Endy Rodriguez comes up here in like June or July, he's going to be a catcher first. Obviously, he'll be a catcher first. But eventually when Henry Davis gets here, what decision do you make? Because you don't platoon these guys, especially if they're both performing really well. You do not platoon these guys in any world imaginable. So that comes with a decision. And I mean, Henry Davis, you look at his season this year that was riddled by injuries. After hearing Endy's numbers, you'll be like, oh, his numbers are terrible. But they profile a little bit more as catcher numbers. 264, 10 home runs, 42 RBIs, 9 stolen bases, and an 852 OPS. He's a career 889 OPS guy. That's with him getting time this year in Altoona. He actually played the most games of the season this year in Altoona, just short of it in Greensboro, but he actually performed way better in single A than he did in Altoona. But let's also not kid ourselves here and not forget that Henry Davis was the top overall selection in last year's draft. Give the kid time to grow. You have to. But what I also put emphasis on here when it comes to the Pittsburgh Pirates is the catcher position right now may not look that great at all. But what you can at least give yourself solace in is lots of teams can't say this. You have 2 guys that could potentially be your starting catcher moving forward. 2 guys. One of them more than likely could be able to move to another position in Endy Rodriguez. That is not something that you get from a lot of these smaller teams. With the fact that Roberto Perez will probably return as well, I think the Pirates will be just fine at this position in 2023. I think they bring back Roberto Perez and one of Tyler Heinemann or Jason DeLay. By June or July, you see Endy Rodriguez make his debut. Maybe by August or September, you see Henry Davis make his debut, and then they figure it out from there. The catcher position was definitely a ride this year. I mean, you probably don't even remember all the names of the guys that played the catcher position this year, and I don't really either. But that was my review of the 2022 catcher position and what I thought about it, what I think could happen, what I think will happen with this position moving forward. And it's a patience thing. I think the Pirates just need to be patient with the catcher position moving forward because the answers are already in their farm system, I believe. On tomorrow's episode, it's Mailbag Wednesday per usual. Make sure you submit your questions to me via DM on Twitter, wherever you want to put them. Just put them somewhere. I will get to them. On Thursday, we will be taking a look at first base, some free agent options for the Pittsburgh Pirates, but also some internal options on what they could decide to do with that position. And then on Friday, we're going to talk a little bit about the middle infield and some of those players. That's the slate for the week. With that said, guys, thank you for making me your first listen of the day every single day here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am your host, Ethan Smith, who does the most, and I will see you guys later on the flip side.